Here you'll see one of the greatest male skaters of all time, Lushenko, but he destroyed his body in the 2014 Olympics. He couldn't finish his routines. Well, that's a good starting point for skeletal muscles. Their basic action is to pull. We call that agonist. And that's a good word because there's antagonistic action as well. And that's when they're going to oppose another movement. A good example is bicep brachii. In the upper arm, you'll see it's going to shorten the angle of the arm. We call that flexion. And then if we want to increase the angle by extending the arm, we call that extension. We have the tricep brachii. So these are antagonists going against each other as we flex and extend. Synergists, think of synergy, that is like combined action. And that's when muscles help the prime movers. Prime movers are the ones doing most of the action. And they'll also reduce some of the side-to-side movements so that our actions are powerful and they're not decreased by side-to-side motion. Look at the brachioradialis, flexor carpi radialis. I'll talk about these later, but these are going to help the biceps to flex, shorten that angle. Soleus, I'll talk about this later as well. It's under the calf and the gastrocnemius, and it helps to plantar flex the foot and raise the heel. These muscles may sometimes take over if we have an injury. A good example is the gluteus maximus, that large buttocks muscle. When it's injured, it's the prime mover for hip extension, but that doesn't mean we're just going to fall down and stop moving, because we have the gluteus medius lies underneath. We have the biceps femoris and the semitendinosus, which are both in the back of the leg, called hamstrings. They'll keep us moving. I mean, we'll hobble, it won't look pretty, but we're going to keep going. Fixators, think of stable, because when we have a powerful prime moving muscle, we need these stabilizers to hold the bone in place so that we have something strong to pull from, just like on a bicycle. Can you imagine riding a bicycle if there's a bunch of joints in it? You try to pedal and it's going sideways and it collapses. Well, the fixators make sure that there's a rigid spine or structure to pull against. Trapezius does that because it's going to hold the head, neck, and the scapula in place while we're doing some lift. Scalenes do that as well. Front of the neck, they're small, but they're just enough to allow the sternocleidomastoid to turn our head in a powerful movement. There's different ways we name muscles. Location is a common way, like brachialis, brachium means arm. Rectus abdominis, think of abdomen. Pectoralis, chest. Temporalis, the temple bone. And frontalis, the frontal bone. Orbicularis oculi, the muscles around the eye, helps us to blink. Nasalis, of the nose. Orbicularis oris, the kissing muscle. Here are three flexors, and they're all located. One's near the radialis, the radial bone. The palmaris longus, dead ends into the palm. And the flexor carpi ulnaris into the ulna. Now I'll be talking about these again, so let's just stay calm. By the time I'm done with this lecture, a lot of things are going to make sense. If we look at the spine of the scapula and the shoulder to the right, the muscle above it is the supraspinatus, and the one below it is the infraspinatus. How about the wide muscles of our back? Why don't we call those lat for wide, latissimus dorsi for back? And the legs of the muscle. Muscle of the legs. Vastus, those are the big muscles on either side. And then there's the rectus femoris coming straight down. Lateralis, think of away from the midline. Medialis, midline. Intermedius, that's underneath the rectus femoris, so it's kind of in between. We also name muscles according to their shape. And this works for the deltoid, which is a triangular shape of the shoulder. Serratus, that's that boxer's muscle. We often don't see in most people. It's a sawtooth muscle below the pectoralis. Gracilis, that slender gracile muscle down along our inseam. Tensor fascia, which is a wide band of cartilage and muscle. Gastrocnemius, that's the stomach-shaped calf muscle. I guess it's kind of stomach-shaped. It's rounded anyway. Soleus looks like a flatfish, like a sole, and it lies under the gastroc. Remember, that's one of the synergists. We also use size to name muscles. Oh, there's our skater. Krashenko also injured his adductor muscles. He had something like 17 surgeries. Poor guy. But he was great. Adductor longus, a long groin muscle. Adductor magnus, a large groin muscle. How about if something's short, we call it brevis, like flexor digitorum brevis? Or what about the minimi, small, abductor digiti minimi, little toe? Same with teres major. That's a larger one than the teres minor, which is up in the shoulder area. The direction of the fascicles, those are the bundles of muscles, and the fibers themselves. So I mentioned rectus abdominis. It's a straight abdominal muscle. It comes straight down. There's also external obliques that are going to come in from the side at an angle to the midline. And then finally, deep, you don't see these muscles in the mirror, the transversus abdominis, which come at a right angle. Well, there is another way of naming muscles, and this one makes sense as well, because how about number of places where the muscles attach? Like the quadriceps, the major leg muscles in front, 4 heads. Or the tricep brachii, the back of the arm, 3 heads. Bicep brachii, 2 heads. Bi meaning 2. Action. Now, you look at this picture to the right and you might think, oh my gosh, how am I going to learn this? But all the muscles on the posterior part of your forearm, that's the top with the palm down, all of them have the same action. They're going to extend the wrist or extend the fingers. Now, wrist is carpi, Latin for wrist. Digit is fingers. So then all you have to do is think, okay, where is the muscle? Well, if it's along the radius, the bone that goes along the thumb side of the forearm, we call it radialis. If it's on the elbow side, the ulna side, we call that ulnaris. If it moves a little pinky, then we call that the digiti minimi. And if it moves 3 of the fingers in the middle, let's call that just digitorum, digit for fingers. See, not so bad. On the palm side, we call that the anterior view. Brachioradialis, this one helps the bicep, if you remember, it's going to flex. In fact, all the muscles on the anterior side are flexors. They're going to move that wrist forwards towards the body. If it's along the radius bone, moves the wrist, why not call it carpi radialis? Or how if it goes straight into the palm, palmaris longus? When we look at muscles, they attach at different places. The origin is where it's fairly stationary, like the spine. Spine doesn't move around a lot, but the arm does. So for the trapezius, it's going to originate along the spine, and it's going to insert in the clavicle and the scapula of the shoulder. Okay, now you might think, how am I ever going to remember this? But just look at the muscle. The most movable part is going to be the shoulder area, clavicle, scapula, and the part that's not going to move is all here. So on a test, you're taking a test, and there's a question, you think, oh my gosh, I forgot. But then you just look, well, anything along here is not very movable, so that's got to be the origin. And maybe I forgot the name of all these, but let's see. C7, that's like cervical, that's the neck, and occipital, of course, the head, and thoracic. So it's doable. You can get this. Masseter, that's the chewing muscle. Origin on the zygomatic, that's the cheekbone. And the most movable part, the insertion, will be the mandible, because that's what we chew with. Sternocleidomastoid, it seems like a big word, but when you think about it, break it down. Sterno, think of sternum. Cleido means clavicle. Mastoid is the insertion point. So the origin on the sternum and the clavicle, and the insertion on the back. There you have it. Because you can move your head around a lot better than you can your sternum and your clavicle. Kind of makes sense. On the temporalis, well, that seems almost too easy, because origin on the temporal bone, insertion on the mandible. And finally, we have the latissimus dorsi. You remember that word? That large back muscle. The origin is going to be along the thoracic area, the sacrum down here, the ilium. All right, because that doesn't move much. Even if you do some fancy dancing moves, you still can't move that as much as you can move your arm. And that's where the insertion is on the humerus, the major bone of the upper arm. All right, spend some time with these. You'll be surprised. It all starts to make sense because the body doesn't make many mistakes when it comes to movements. All right, thanks for listening.